I never thought I would catch someone breaking into my property during the worst snowstorm Colorado had seen in 15 years. But there I was, watching my security camera footage on my phone, while three figures tried to jimmy open my cabin door with crowbars at 11:30 at night. My name is Ryan Beckett, and I have owned a small cabin in Timber Ridge, a gated community about 40 miles west of Denver, for the past 6 years. The cabin sits on 2 acres of pristine mountain land that I purchased with my own money after saving for nearly a decade. It was my sanctuary, my escape from the chaos of city life, and the place where I could finally breathe without feeling the weight of the world crushing down on me. The Timber Ridge Homeowners Association had been a thorn in my side since day one. When I first moved in, they welcomed me with a smile and a 70-page covenant document that outlined everything from the exact shade of brown my cabin exterior could be painted to the specific type of rocks I could use in my landscaping. I thought it was excessive, but I figured I could live with it. What I did not expect was the relentless harassment that would follow. The HOA president was a woman named Patricia Winters, a 52-year-old former real estate agent who treated the Homeowners Association like her personal fiefdom. She had short blonde hair that she kept in a perpetual soccer mom style, wore designer athleisure where that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and drove a white Mercedes SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "I speak to managers." She was the living embodiment of every Karen stereotype, rolled into one insufferable package. Patricia had made it her mission to make my life miserable from the moment I refused to attend one of her mandatory monthly HOA meetings. I worked 60-hour weeks as a software engineer for a tech startup in Denver, and the last thing I wanted to do on a Saturday morning was listen to Patricia drone on about proper mailbox maintenance and the dangers of leaving Christmas lights up past January 15th. That refusal sparked a campaign of petty violations and fines that would have been comical if they were not so infuriating. I got cited for my grass being a quarter-inch too tall. I got fined because my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. They even tried to fine me because a deer ate some of my landscaping, and they claimed I was not maintaining my property properly. I fought back on every single violation, submitting appeals and documentation that proved I was in compliance with their ridiculous rules. I won most of the disputes, which only seemed to make Patricia angrier. She started showing up at my cabin unannounced, claiming she needed to do property inspections. I told her she needed to give me 24 hours notice as required by Colorado law, and she would huff and storm off in her Mercedes, no doubt planning her next move. The breaking point came 3 months ago when Patricia sent me a certified letter claiming that my cabin was in violation of some obscure architectural guideline, and that I needed to make $15,000 worth of modifications within 60 days, or face a lien on my property. The modifications she wanted were completely unnecessary and not actually required by any document I had signed when I purchased the property. I hired a real estate attorney named Marcus Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. He was a sharp guy in his late 30s who had built his entire practice around fighting abusive homeowners associations. After reviewing my case, he told me that Patricia and the board were way out of line and that we had grounds for a harassment lawsuit. We sent a cease and desist letter, and I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The snowstorm had been forecasted for a week. Colorado was expecting 2 to 3 feet of snow in the mountains, with whiteout conditions and winds gusting up to 50 miles per hour. I had planned to stay at my apartment in Denver and wait it out, but I got a notification on my phone Wednesday afternoon that my cabin's heat had gone offline. I had a smart thermostat installed that would alert me if the temperature dropped below a certain threshold. If the heat stayed off too long, my pipes would freeze and burst, causing tens of thousands of dollars in damage. I tried to restart the system remotely, but nothing worked. I had no choice but to drive up there and fix it myself. The drive up to Timber Ridge was treacherous. The snow had started falling around 3 in the afternoon, and by the time I reached the mountain roads at 5, visibility was maybe 20 feet in front of me. My truck had 4-wheel drive and good snow tires, but I still crawled along at 15 miles per hour, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I made it to my cabin just before 7. The gate at the entrance to Timber Ridge was unmanned due to the storm, so I used my access code to get through. The roads inside the community had not been plowed yet, and I had to push through nearly 8 inches of fresh powder to reach my driveway. The cabin was dark and cold when I walked in. I immediately went to check the furnace in the basement and found that someone had shut off the gas valve. Not a malfunction, not a pilot light that had gone out, but the main gas valve had been manually turned to the off position. My stomach dropped. There was no way that valve had turned itself off. Someone had been in my cabin and deliberately sabotaged my heating system. I turned the gas back on and relit the pilot light, and the furnace roared back to life. I stood there in the basement, my mind racing. Who would do something like this? And more importantly, how did they get in? There were no signs of forced entry, and I had changed all the locks after Patricia's unwanted inspection attempts. That is when I remembered something Marcus had told me during one of our meetings. He mentioned that HOA boards sometimes kept master keys to properties in the community, a practice that was legally questionable but not uncommon. The builder who developed Timber Ridge had probably given the HOA copies of all the locks when the properties were first constructed. I felt a surge of anger. If Patricia had used a master key to enter my property without permission and sabotaged my heating during a snowstorm, that was not just a civil matter anymore. That was criminal trespassing, breaking and entering, and possibly even attempted property damage. I went through the cabin, checking every room. Nothing appeared to be missing or disturbed, but I noticed muddy footprints near the basement door that definitely had not been there the last time I visited. I took photos of everything with my phone, documenting the evidence. The storm was getting worse. The wind howled outside and snow pelted against the windows with a sound like thrown rice. I checked the weather report on my phone and saw that the storm was expected to intensify overnight, before tapering off sometime Friday morning. I was stuck here until the roads were cleared, which meant I had time to figure out what to do next. I called Marcus, but it went straight to voicemail. He was probably home with his family, waiting out the storm like any sensible person. I left him a message explaining what I had found and asked him to call me back when he could. Then I did something that would turn out to be the smartest decision I made that night. I set up my laptop in the living room and accessed my security camera system. I had installed cameras around the exterior of the cabin after Patricia started her harassment campaign, but I had never bothered to monitor them closely. I set the system to record continuously and positioned my laptop screen so I could see all 4 camera feeds at once. I made myself dinner, a simple pasta dish with some vegetables I had brought up from Denver, and settled in for what I expected to be a long, boring night of watching snow fall on empty camera feeds. At 11:27, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front camera. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the feed. 3 figures in dark winter coats and ski masks were walking up my driveway through the snow. My heart started pounding. I watched as they approached my front door, and one of them pulled out what looked like a set of keys. They had a key. They actually had a key to my property. I grabbed my phone and started recording the laptop screen, capturing the security footage in real time. The figures tried several keys before finding one that worked. The door swung open and they stepped inside my cabin. I was upstairs in my bedroom with the door locked. I could hear their voices downstairs, muffled but distinct. One of them was definitely a woman, and she sounded angry. "Where is the documentation?" the woman's voice said. "He said he kept everything in a file cabinet, my documentation." They were looking for my files on the HOA dispute. I kept all my paperwork related to the Timber Ridge HOA in a locked filing cabinet in my home office downstairs. Bank statements, legal correspondence with Marcus, copies of the covenants, records of every violation and fine they had tried to impose, and my evidence showing how Patricia had been harassing me. It was everything we would need for our lawsuit. "I don't see a filing cabinet," a male voice responded. "Are you sure he keeps it here? Check the office again," the woman snapped. I recognized that voice now. It was Patricia. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. "911, what is your emergency?" "Someone just broke into my cabin," I whispered. "There are 3 people downstairs right now. I'm locked in my bedroom upstairs." The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "What is your address?" I gave her the address and described the situation. She told me that deputies from the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office were being dispatched immediately, but that it might take them some time to reach me due to the storm conditions. She stayed on the line with me, her voice a steady anchor in what felt like a surreal nightmare. "They are looking for something," I told her quietly. "I can hear them going through my things." Downstairs, I heard crashes and bangs as they tore through my office. I heard Patricia cursing, her voice sharp and frustrated. "It is not here," another male voice said. "Maybe he keeps it in Denver." "No, it has to be here," Patricia insisted. "We need those files. If he submits that evidence in court, we are finished." That confirmed everything I needed to know. They were not here to vandalize my property or steal my television. They were here to destroy evidence for an upcoming legal case. That elevated this from simple breaking and entering to something much more serious. "Madam, I can hear them talking about destroying legal documents," I told the dispatcher. "This is related to a lawsuit I have against the Homeowners Association." "Deputies are approximately 15 minutes out," she responded. "Stay where you are, keep your door locked, and do not confront them." I had no intention of confronting 3 people who were desperate enough to break into someone's home during a snowstorm. I stayed put, my phone in one hand and my laptop in the other, watching the security footage and listening to them ransack my office. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. "Check the upstairs," Patricia said. "Maybe he has a safe or something up there." My bedroom door had a simple lock, the kind you could pop open with a bobby pin or a credit card. It would not hold them out if they really wanted to get in. I looked around for something to defend myself with and grabbed a heavy flashlight from my nightstand. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped outside my bedroom door. The handle jiggled. "It is locked," the male voice said. "So unlock it," Patricia snapped. "Madam, they are trying to enter the room I am in," I whispered to the dispatcher. "Deputies are 12 minutes away," she said. "Is there anywhere else you can go?" My bedroom had a small balcony that overlooked the backyard. In summer, I would sit out there with a beer and watch the sunset over the mountains. In the middle of a snowstorm with 3 feet of powder on the ground and more falling, it was not exactly an ideal escape route, but it was better than being trapped in the room with 3 people who were already committed to multiple felonies. "I am going to go out on the balcony," I told the dispatcher. "It is negative 15 degrees outside with wind chill," she said. "You will not last long in those conditions." "I will last longer than I will if they get in here," I replied. I grabbed my winter coat from the closet, pulled on my boots, and wrapped a scarf around my face. The bedroom door lock clicked, and I heard it swing open just as I stepped out onto the balcony and closed the sliding glass door behind me. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The wind tore at my coat, and the snow stung my exposed skin. I could not see more than a few feet in front of me through the whiteout conditions. I crouched down next to the railing, making myself as small as possible. Through the sliding glass door, I could see two figures enter my bedroom. One was tall and broad, probably 6 feet and built like a linebacker. The other was shorter and stockier. They both wore ski masks, but I could see their eyes scanning the room. "He is not here," the shorter one said. "Then where is he?" That was Patricia's voice calling from downstairs. "His truck is in the driveway. Maybe he went for a walk or something. In this storm, do not be stupid." They searched my bedroom, pulling open drawers and checking the closet. I watched from my hiding spot on the balcony, my teeth chattering, my fingers growing numb despite my gloves. One of them approached the sliding glass door. My heart stopped. If he looked down, he would see me crouched there in the shadows, but he only glanced out at the storm and shook his head. "Nobody would be dumb enough to go out there," he said. They left my bedroom and went back downstairs. I stayed on the balcony, counting the seconds, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air. My phone buzzed. It was the dispatcher. "Are you safe?" Her text message read. I had forgotten she was still on the line. I typed back with fingers that barely worked. "On balcony." They searched bedroom but did not find me. "Deputies are 8 minutes out. Can you hold on?" "Yes." But I was not sure that was true. The cold was seeping through my coat and into my bones. My feet were going numb. I had maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia became a real concern. I heard more crashing from inside the cabin. They were really tearing the place apart now, their initial caution abandoned. I heard Patricia shouting orders, heard furniture being overturned, heard glass breaking. Then I heard something that made my blood run even colder than the temperature outside. "Burn it," Patricia said. "What?" One of the men responded. "Burn the cabin. If we cannot find the files, we will destroy everything. Make it look like an electrical fire from the storm. Nobody will question it." "Are you insane?" the other man said. "That is arson. That is making sure we do not go to prison for what we have already done," Patricia shot back. "Do you want to explain to a judge why we broke into his property? Or do you want to collect the insurance money and move on with our lives?" There was a long pause. I could not believe what I was hearing. She was actually going to burn down my cabin with me potentially still inside. "What if he is here?" one of the men asked. "What if he is hiding somewhere?" "Then he should have thought about that before he decided to sue the HOA, Patricia said coldly. I texted the dispatcher immediately. "They are planning to burn down the cabin. They think I might still be inside. Where are the deputies?" 5 minutes. "Do not go back inside." "Can you get off the balcony?" I looked over the railing. It was a 12-foot drop to the ground below, which was currently buried under 3 feet of snow. I could probably make the jump without breaking anything, but then I would be stumbling around in a blizzard in the dark. The balcony had an overhang that would provide some shelter from the snow, and at least I could see what was happening inside the cabin. "Staying on balcony," I texted back. "Have some shelter here." I watched through the sliding glass door as one of the men went into my kitchen. I heard the sound of the stove being turned on. They were going to stage it to look like a gas leak or a cooking accident, but they had made a crucial mistake. When I relit the pilot light on the furnace, I had checked to make sure there were no other gas leaks in the system. Everything was secure and functioning properly. Any investigator worth their salt would be able to tell that this fire was deliberately set. I heard sirens in the distance. The deputies were close. Patricia must have heard them too because she suddenly shouted, "Go, go, go." The three figures rushed out of my cabin and down the driveway. I watched them run through the snow toward a large SUV parked at the end of the street, but the snow was deep and the going was slow. By the time they reached the vehicle, red and blue lights were flashing through the storm. Two sheriff's department SUVs blocked the road, their emergency lights turning the falling snow into a kaleidoscope of color. Deputies emerged from the vehicles, their hands on their weapons. "Hands up! Get on the ground!" I watched from the balcony as Patricia and her two accomplices were forced to their knees in the snow. Even from this distance, I could see Patricia arguing with the deputies, her arms waving dramatically. Whatever she was saying, the deputies were not buying it. They handcuffed all three of them and began searching the SUV. More sirens approached. A fire truck arrived, followed by an ambulance. Deputies came up to my cabin, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Clear Creek County Sheriff's Department. If anyone is inside, make yourself known." I slid open the balcony door and stepped back into my bedroom. The warmth of the cabin felt like heaven after those minutes in the freezing cold. "Up here," I called out. "I am the homeowner. I am coming down." I made my way downstairs carefully, my numb feet clumsy on the steps. Two deputies met me in the living room, their expressions serious. "Ryan Beckett?" one of them asked. He was a tall man with a thick mustache and kind eyes. "That is me." "Are you injured?" "No, just cold. I was hiding on the balcony." The other deputy, a younger woman with sharp features, looked around at the destruction in my cabin. My office had been completely ransacked. File cabinet drawers hung open, papers scattered everywhere. In the kitchen, I could smell gas from where they had turned on the stove. "We caught 3 individuals attempting to flee the scene," the male deputy said. "They are in custody right now. Can you tell us what happened?" I took a deep breath and told them everything. I showed them the security camera footage on my laptop, the recording of them breaking in with a key. I explained about the HOA dispute, about Patricia's harassment campaign, about how I found my heat sabotaged earlier that evening. I showed them my text messages with the 911 dispatcher and played the recording I had made on my phone where Patricia explicitly said to burn down the cabin. The female deputy's expression grew darker as I went through the evidence. "This woman, Patricia Winters, she is the HOA president?" "Yes. And she said to burn down the cabin knowing you might be inside." "That is what I heard. It is on the recording." The male deputy shook his head. "That is attempted murder, along with breaking and entering, trespassing, criminal mischief, and attempted arson. And evidence tampering," I added. "They were trying to destroy documents related to a lawsuit." "That too," he agreed. A paramedic came in and insisted on checking me over. I had mild frostbite on my fingers and toes, but nothing serious. They wrapped me in a blanket and gave me hot chocolate from a thermos while the deputies continued their investigation. More law enforcement arrived. A detective from the sheriff's office, a fire marshal to document the attempted arson, and eventually a deputy district attorney who had been called in despite the late hour and terrible weather. I gave my statement multiple times, walking different officials through exactly what had happened. They photographed everything, collected evidence, and downloaded all my security camera footage. The fire marshal confirmed that the stove had been deliberately turned on with no flame, allowing gas to build up in the kitchen. "Another 5 minutes and this place would have gone up like a Roman candle," he told me grimly. Outside, I could see Patricia sitting in the back of a sheriff's SUV. Her ski mask had been removed, and even through the falling snow, I could see the fury on her face. The two men with her had been identified as her husband, Donald Winters, and the vice president of the HOA board, a man named Gregory Shaw. The deputy district attorney, a serious woman in her 40s named Sarah Kim, interviewed me for nearly an hour. She was particularly interested in Patricia's statement about burning the cabin and the recordings I had made. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases I have ever seen," she told me. "You have video evidence of them breaking in, audio of them discussing destroying evidence and committing arson, and multiple witnesses in the form of the responding deputies who heard the gas running in your kitchen. They are going away for a long time." "What about the HOA?" I asked. "Can they still come after me?" Sarah smiled, a fierce expression that made me glad she was on my side. "After tonight, the HOA is finished. Between the criminal charges and the civil liability for their actions, Timber Ridge Homeowners Association will be lucky if they survive the week. And you will have one hell of a lawsuit for harassment, emotional distress, and attempted destruction of property." It was almost 3 in the morning by the time the law enforcement finished their investigation. The storm had not let up, and there was no way I was driving back to Denver in these conditions. A deputy offered to put me up in a hotel, but I refused. This was my cabin, and I was not going to let Patricia drive me out of it. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up the mess they had made. My office was a disaster, but most of my important documents were still intact. The filing cabinet had been locked, and apparently none of them had thought to bring bolt cutters. All my evidence for the lawsuit was safe. As I worked, I thought about Patricia and her accomplices sitting in jail cells, their expensive lawyers probably already being called. I thought about how a simple property dispute had escalated to the point where someone was willing to commit murder rather than admit they were wrong. It was insane, but more than anything, I felt a sense of relief. The harassment was over. The constant stress of wondering what Patricia would do next, the anger at being targeted for simply wanting to live in peace in my own property, all of it was finished. She had gone too far, committed crimes that could not be explained away or swept under the rug, and now she would face the consequences. I finally crawled into bed around 5 in the morning as the storm began to taper off. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but I slept better than I had in months. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and meetings. Marcus, my attorney, was shocked when I told him what had happened. He immediately filed an emergency injunction preventing the HOA from taking any action against my property, and began drafting a lawsuit that would effectively bankrupt the organization. The local news picked up the story. HOA president arrested for attempted arson ran as the headline in the Denver Post. The story detailed Patricia's arrest and included interviews with other homeowners in Timber Ridge who came forward with their own stories of harassment and abuse. It turned out I was not the only one who had been targeted. Patricia had been running the HOA like a protection racket, using fines and legal threats to control the residents and enrich herself and her allies on the board. The coverage triggered an investigation into the HOA's finances. Auditors discovered that Patricia and Gregory Shaw had been embezzling money from the association's reserve fund for years, using it to pay for personal expenses and fund their harassment campaigns against residents who questioned their authority. The charges kept piling up. Patricia, Donald, and Gregory were formally arraigned a week after their arrest. The district attorney's office hit them with a long list of charges including burglary, attempted arson, attempted murder, criminal mischief, evidence tampering, and embezzlement. Bail was set at $500,000 each. Patricia tried to claim that she was just doing her duty as HOA president and that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Her lawyer argued that she had a legal right to enter properties in the community for inspection purposes. But the prosecution had my security footage showing them breaking in with masks on, my recording of Patricia ordering the cabin to be burned, and the physical evidence of the gas being deliberately released in my kitchen. The judge was not impressed with her excuses. I attended the bail hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching as Patricia's carefully constructed facade crumbled. She was not the imperious HOA president anymore. She was just a middle-aged woman facing serious prison time, and the reality of what she had done was finally sinking in. She saw me as she was being led out of the courtroom. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something in her expression that might have been regret or perhaps just self-pity. I felt nothing. She had brought this entirely on herself. The civil lawsuit moved forward quickly. With the criminal charges pending, the HOA's insurance company refused to provide a defense, arguing that Patricia's actions were not covered under their policy. The organization's bank accounts were frozen as part of the embezzlement investigation, leaving them unable to hire competent legal representation. Marcus filed suit not just against Patricia and the other board members, but against the HOA itself for creating a hostile environment and failing to prevent the harassment. He argued that the organization was structurally corrupt and that it had been used as a vehicle for personal vendettas and financial crimes. Other residents of Timber Ridge joined the lawsuit as a class action. More than 40 homeowners came forward with stories of harassment, illegal fines, and threats. The full scope of Patricia's abuse became clear. She had been targeting anyone who questioned her authority, using the HOA's rules as weapons to punish her perceived enemies. One elderly couple had been fined nearly $20,000 for violations that never actually occurred. A single mother had been threatened with foreclosure because she planted flowers that were not on the approved list. A veteran with PTSD had been subjected to monthly inspections and harassment because he missed a few HOA meetings. The stories went on, painting a picture of an organization that had become completely dysfunctional under Patricia's leadership. The community rallied together in a way it never had before. Residents who had been afraid to speak out while Patricia was in power now shared their experiences openly. They formed a new committee to oversee the dissolution of the old HOA and the creation of a new, more reasonable set of rules for the community. I became something of an accidental leader in this effort. People sought me out for advice, thanking me for standing up to Patricia and for documenting everything so thoroughly. I had not set out to be a crusader against HOA abuse, but that was the role I found myself in. Marcus and I worked with the community to draft new covenants that were fair and reasonable. Gone were the ridiculous rules about grass height, measured to the quarter inch, and approved paint colors that required a microscope to distinguish. The new rules focused on actual community concerns like maintaining property values and ensuring safety, without giving any individual or small group unchecked power over their neighbors. The criminal trial began in June, 6 months after that night in the snowstorm. I was called as the primary witness for the prosecution. I spent 2 days on the stand, walking the jury through everything that had happened. They watched the security footage of Patricia and her accomplices breaking into my cabin. They listened to the recordings of her ordering the place to be burned. They heard testimony from the deputies who responded to the scene and from the fire marshal who confirmed the attempted arson. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she never intended for me to be hurt, that she thought the cabin was empty. But the prosecution pointed out that my truck was in the driveway, clearly visible even in the storm. They argued that Patricia either knew I was inside and did not care, or she was criminally negligent in not checking. Either way, she was guilty. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Patricia, Donald, and Gregory guilty on all counts. Patricia showed no emotion as the verdict was read, sitting stone-faced at the defense table while her attorney patted her shoulder ineffectively. Sentencing came a month later. The judge, a stern man in his 60s who clearly had no patience for people who abused positions of authority, gave Patricia 15 years in state prison. Donald got 12 years, and Gregory got 10. They were also ordered to pay full restitution for the damage to my property and for the embezzled funds from the HOA. Patricia finally broke down when the sentence was announced. She sobbed loudly, her composure completely shattered as the bailiffs led her away in handcuffs. I watched her go and felt a complicated mix of emotions. I was glad that justice had been served, but I also felt a sense of waste. She had thrown away her life, her freedom, and her reputation over a property dispute that could have been resolved with basic human decency and respect for the law. The civil lawsuit settled shortly after the criminal trial concluded. The HOA's assets were liquidated and distributed among the plaintiffs. I received a settlement of $300,000, which more than covered my legal fees and the damage to my cabin. More importantly, the old HOA was officially dissolved and replaced with the new community association we had created. Life in Timber Ridge changed dramatically after Patricia's arrest. The constant tension and fear that had hung over the community evaporated. People were friendlier, more willing to help their neighbors without worrying about petty violations and fines. Newcomers moved in, attracted by the beautiful mountain setting and the newly reformed community rules. I kept my cabin and continued to use it as my weekend retreat. I upgraded the security system and changed all the locks again, though I doubted anyone would be breaking in anymore. The new community association respected property rights and required proper notice for any inspections, and even then only when there was a legitimate concern. Marcus and I stayed in touch. He referred other HOA abuse victims to me, and I helped them document their experiences and understand their rights. I even started a website providing resources for homeowners dealing with abusive associations. It was not something I ever planned to do, but sometimes life pushes you in unexpected directions. I went back to my cabin 1 year after the break-in, on the anniversary of that terrifying night. It was winter again, though not as severe as the previous year. I stood on the balcony where I had hidden from Patricia and her accomplices, looking out at the peaceful snow-covered landscape. The mountains rose in the distance, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything. If I had not installed those security cameras, if I had not documented every interaction with Patricia, if I had not been able to record her confession, things might have turned out very differently. She might have succeeded in burning down my cabin and destroying the evidence of her crimes. I might have been seriously injured or worse, but I had done everything right. I had stood up for myself, documented the abuse, and trusted the legal system to work. And in the end, justice had prevailed. It was not always that way, I knew. There were plenty of people fighting similar battles against abusive HOAs who did not have the resources or the evidence to win. But for me, in this case, everything had worked out. I heard a knock at the door and went downstairs to answer it. It was my neighbor Tom, a retired teacher who lived 2 properties over. He was carrying a bottle of wine. "Thought you might want some company," he said with a smile. "1 year anniversary of the great HOA takedown." I laughed and invited him in. We sat by the fireplace, drinking wine and talking about how much the community had changed. Tom had been one of the homeowners Patricia had targeted, hit with thousands of dollars in bogus fines that the new association had forgiven. He was grateful to finally live in peace. "You know what the funny thing is?" Tom said. "Patricia always talked about protecting property values and maintaining community standards, but property values have gone up 20% since she was arrested. Turns out people are willing to pay more to live in a community that is not run by a tyrant." We talked late into the night, swapping stories about life in Timber Ridge before and after. Other neighbors stopped by, and it turned into an impromptu party. There was a sense of celebration, of having survived something terrible and come out stronger on the other side. As people were leaving, a young couple who had just moved in stopped to thank me. They had read about the HOA situation before purchasing their property and were relieved to find that things had changed so dramatically. "We almost did not buy here because of the HOA horror stories," the woman said. "But then we saw what you and the community did to fix things. It gave us hope that people can still stand up to bullies and win." That comment stuck with me after everyone left. I had not thought of myself as particularly brave or heroic. I had just refused to be pushed around and had insisted on my rights as a property owner. But to these newcomers, what I had done represented something larger, a victory against the kind of petty tyranny that makes people feel powerless in their own homes. I went to bed that night feeling satisfied with how things had turned out. The cabin was mine, truly mine, without the threat of harassment or retaliation hanging over me. The community was healthier and happier, and Patricia was in prison where she belonged, unable to hurt anyone else. The next morning I drove back to Denver, but the cabin would always be there waiting for me, my sanctuary in the mountains, hard-won and finally at peace. Years passed. Patricia served her full sentence without parole, her appeals all denied. Donald and Gregory got out earlier for good behavior, but they left Colorado and never came back to Timber Ridge. The community continued to thrive under its new, reasonable rules. I eventually sold my apartment in Denver and moved to the cabin full-time. My job went fully remote during the pandemic, and I realized I did not need to live in the city anymore. The cabin became my home, not just a weekend retreat. I got involved in state-level HOA reform efforts, working with legislators to pass laws that would protect homeowners from the kind of abuse I had experienced. Colorado passed several new regulations requiring greater transparency in HOA finances, limiting the fees and fines associations could impose, and making it easier for homeowners to challenge unfair rules. The website I started grew into a nonprofit organization that provided free legal resources and support to people fighting abusive HOAs across the country. We helped hundreds of families stand up for their rights and push back against organizations that had overstepped their authority. I never forgot that night in the snowstorm, watching 3 figures break into my cabin with criminal intent. It was terrifying, but it was also the moment when Patricia's house of cards finally collapsed. All her petty harassment, her threats and intimidation, came crashing down because she could not accept that she did not have unlimited power over other people's lives. Looking back, I realized that standing up to her was one of the most important things I ever did. Not just for myself, but for everyone else in the community who had suffered under her rule. Sometimes you have to be willing to fight, to document everything, to go through the stress and expense of legal battles, because that is the only way bullies are ever stopped. My cabin sits peacefully in the mountains now, no longer a source of conflict or stress. The HOA sends me reasonable notices about community events and necessary maintenance. They respect my property rights, and I respect my neighbors. It is exactly what a community association should be: a tool for cooperation rather than a weapon for control. On winter nights when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the pines, I sometimes think about Patricia sitting in her prison cell, probably still convinced that she was right and the world was wrong. I feel no satisfaction in her punishment, only a quiet relief that she can no longer hurt anyone. I caught the HOA breaking into my cabin during that snowstorm. They left in handcuffs 20 minutes later, and that made all the difference.